In 1961, a woman unexpectedly gives birth in a Philadelphia department store. A doctor soon arrives to check on the crying baby and is shocked to discover the infant has fractures in his arms and legs. Many years later, David is on a train returning to Philadelphia after a job interview in New York. As a woman prepares to sit next to him, he discreetly removes his ring and pockets it. They strike up a conversation about sports. David admits his fear of water and his dislike for football. He attempts to flirt, but she declines and moves to another seat, prompting him to put his ring back on. Suddenly, the train accelerates, shaking violently. At home, David's son Joseph watches the news, which reports a train derailment with no survivors, causing Joseph to panic as his father was supposed to be on that train. Later, at the hospital, David wakes up, noticing another patient in surgery nearby. A doctor finds him, astonished by his lack of injuries and pain despite being the accident's sole survivor. At home, David's estrangement from his wife Audrey is evident. They sleep in separate rooms, and their interactions are strained. The next day, David attends a memorial for the 177 victims of the train accident and later finds an envelope with a mysterious card asking how many days he's been sick in his life, sparking his curiosity. At work, where he provides security for a football team, David requests a check on his sick days and learns he hasn't taken any in 5 years, earning him a raise. That night, he asks Audrey if she recalls him ever being sick, to which she admits she cannot remember a single instance. Flashback to 1974, where the once baby now teenager with osteogenesis imperfecta is fearful of going outside, earning the nickname Mr. Glass from his peers. To encourage him, his mother promises a comic book for every day he ventures outside. In adulthood, this boy, Elijah, runs a comic book art gallery, fiercely defending the integrity of comics as an art form. He even cancels a sale upon learning the buyer intends the art for a child. David and his son Joseph visit Elijah to inquire about the card. Elijah shares his fascination with David's health and his theory of comic books mirroring ancient tales of human extremes. He suggests David might be unbreakable, having survived catastrophic events unscathed. Although Joseph is intrigued, David dismisses the idea as a bizarre scam and leaves with his son. Later, spurred by newspaper articles about the train accident, David discovers a gun and a folder of clippings about his life, including his football career and a devastating car accident, highlighting his miraculous survival. His reflection is interrupted by Audrey, who confronts him about potential infidelities. After David reassures Audrey that he hasn't been unfaithful, she confesses that the train accident deeply affected her and expresses a desire to repair their relationship, viewing his miraculous survival as a sign for a second chance. Later, Elijah visits David at work, suggesting that David's choice of a security job stems from an instinctive desire to protect others. While patrolling, David senses a man in the crowd who seems likely to evade a security check. True to David's intuition, the man leaves abruptly. Elijah is intrigued by David's ability to detect the threat and asks how he knew. David explains he had a visual impression in his head about the man. Elijah excitedly labels this as David's superpower. But David, uncomfortable with the discussion, asks Elijah to leave. Before leaving, Elijah inquires if Audrey was involved in the car accident, which David confirms. Afterward, Elijah attempts to follow the suspicious man but, hindered by his physical condition, falls and sustains multiple fractures upon seeing the man's concealed gun, confirming David's prediction. After the game, David returns home and reprimands Joseph for playing football, recalling Audrey's distaste for the sport due to its risks. Later, motivated to test his limits, David begins weightlifting, starting with 250 pounds and gradually increasing the weight with Joseph's help until he lifts 350 pounds without difficulty. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Elijah, now dealing with severe fractures, engages Audrey in conversation during physiotherapy, subtly probing about her marriage. He accidentally mentions David's name, raising Audrey's suspicions. Elijah shares his theory about David, leaving Audrey uncertain. During another event, David experiments with his supposed ability by sensing the intentions of people who bump into him in a crowd. He initially hears distressing voices, and then spots a man acting suspiciously. David pulls the man aside for a search, but finds nothing, leading him to doubt his own abilities. Shortly after, David is called to Joseph's school following a fight. A teacher recounts an incident from David's childhood where he nearly drowned, spending 5 minutes underwater, which they miraculously survived, sparking an urban legend. Disheartened, David dismisses the notion of being special. However, Joseph, who fought to defend a classmate from racial harassment, insists on seeing his father as a hero. That evening, Audrey reveals to David that Elijah had disclosed everything to her. Their conversation is abruptly interrupted when they find Joseph pointing David's gun at him, trying to prove his father's invulnerability. After a tense moment, David convinces Joseph to put down the gun. The next day, David confronts Elijah, who insists the man at the stadium had a weapon, and suggests David faked his football injury to win Audrey's affection. David, seeking to end the persistent theories, tells Elijah about his childhood pneumonia caused by the drowning incident, believing this disproves the superhero narrative. Later, Elijah is found in a comic book store, unresponsive and detached from reality. In 1961, a woman unexpectedly gives birth in a Philadelphia department store. A doctor arrives promptly to examine the crying baby and is shocked to find the newborn has fractures in his arms and legs. Many years later, David is on a train returning to Philadelphia after a job interview in New York. As a woman prepares to sit next to him, he discreetly removes his ring and tucks it into his pocket. They strike up a conversation about sports. David shares his fear of water and dislike for football, attempting to flirt, but she politely declines and moves to another seat. David then slips his ring back on. Suddenly, the train accelerates and begins shaking violently. Back at home, David's son Joseph watches a news report about a train derailment with no survivors, causing him to panic as his father was supposed to be on that train. Later, at the hospital, David wakes up and notices another patient undergoing surgery nearby. A doctor approaches him, surprised by his lack of injuries and pain despite being the accident's sole survivor. Back at home, the tension between David and his wife Audrey is apparent. They sleep in separate rooms, and their interactions are strained. The following day, David attends a memorial for the 177 victims of the train accident and later finds a mysterious envelope in his car with a card asking how many days he's been sick in his life, which piques his curiosity. At work, where he is a security officer for a football team, David asks the secretary to check his sick days and learns he hasn't taken any in 5 years, earning him a raise. That night, he inquires with Audrey if she ever remembers him being sick, to which she admits she cannot recall a single instance since they met in college. Flashing back to 1974, the baby, now a teenager with osteogenesis imperfecta, is fearful of going outside due to his condition, which has earned him the nickname Mr. Glass at school. To encourage him to leave the house, his mother promises him a comic book for every day he ventures outside. As an adult, this boy, Elijah, now runs a comic book art gallery, passionately defending comics as a legitimate form of art. He cancels a sale when he learns the buyer intends the art for a young child. David and his son Joseph visit Elijah to inquire about the card. Elijah expresses his fascination with David's health and his theory that comic books are reflections of ancient tales of human extremes. He suggests that David might be unbreakable, having survived catastrophic events unscathed. Although Joseph is intrigued, David dismisses the notion as a bizarre scam and leaves with his son. Later, inspired by newspaper articles about the train accident, David finds a gun and a folder of clippings about his life, including his football career and a severe car accident, underscoring his miraculous survival. His reflection is interrupted by Audrey, who confronts him about potential infidelities.